Hi, this is Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. You are plugged into the Conduit Street podcast, the very best place to learn about the policies affecting local government in Maryland.
Welcome to the briefing room here on the Conduit Street podcast. I'm Dom Butchko, and once again, joining me in the co-host spot today is my partner in housing policy, my partner in crime, the one, the only, Terry Hickey, Director of Baltimore County's Department of Housing and Community Development. Terry, I think this is going to be our best one yet.
You know, I think we keep raising the bar, and you keep asking me back, so that's a really good sign. I don't think we say partner in crime on things like this, so we're going to have to come up with another one for that.
Yeah. My bro in building.
There we go. Seriously, today I'm really excited to dig into one of these housing-related topics that doesn't get the headlines every day. So you either know or you don't know. But what we're going to talk about today determines whether thousands of Maryland families can afford to stay in their existing homes year after year, which is worth the attention of a whole episode.
So I actually think this episode's really interesting because we talk a lot about building and how do we get new units, but we don't put enough attention on how do we preserve the existing units that we have. We have to keep units affordable, protect our resources. And so this whole conversation is about housing preservation. We're going to talk about specific tools like Right of First Refusal or ROFR, which I just get the image of a dog every time someone says ROFR, but really exciting episode we have planned here.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We are talking a lot about housing production when we talk about finance and these big projects. But when you start to look at the numbers, we know we're losing existing housing quicker than we can build it. And if you don't have a parallel strategy to deal with that, you're going to end up net behind, which isn't good. So let's dig into a preservation conversation.
So before we kick it off, I want to do a quick reminder to please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It turns out the only people who are subscribed are my mom and Terry's mom. And so while we love our moms, we need you to support the show too. So remember to like and subscribe. But with that, we have a great guest lined up to talk about preservation today. We have Jonathan Butler, Director of Prince George's County Department of Housing and Community Development. Jonathan, welcome to the briefing room.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Fantastic. It's a privilege.
Jonathan, before we dive headfirst into the policy, let's start with your background. Terry and I have been able to get just a ton of exciting guests on, including yourself. And I just love hearing how people have what their path were to lead them to the positions that they're in. In a county like Prince George's, you're one of the biggest counties in the state and in the country. So how do you become head of Prince George's County Department of Housing?
Yeah, no. So my path to housing kind of been interesting. I actually started on the federal side many years ago with the U.S. Department of Transportation in a management training program for contracting and procurement. Did that for a few years and then transitioned to the private side, worked for this, small company called Lockheed Martin Corporation and did that for a few years under contracting. And then I actually got pulled into public service with the District of Columbia. And this is why I worked in planning and economic development for a while there. I think that, the path leading to housing for me kind of came through my prior position where I was director for the Prince George's County Office of Central Services, which is really much like the GSA of Prince George's County. And I think it's the connective tissue there in my prior work where I was overseeing some 4,000 square feet of real estate and managing 5 million square feet of property, government properties, as well as thousands of square feet of lease management and leading about $500 million in design and capital construction portfolio. A lot of that has enabled me to incorporate, to kind of now move into housing. I know housing incorporates a lot of those particular attributes, but much, much more. Policy, regulation, community. But that is kind of how I got into this business and have been in it for a year now. It's been fantastic and certainly thankful for being, now part of not only a local, regional, but a national conversation surrounding housing affordability and housing crisis.
That's a really fascinating path to this. And I'm glad we start out with that kind of question because it also speaks to your perspective on these complicated things we're going to talk about. So with that, let's start at the beginning, right? When policymakers hear affordable housing preservation, I know from conversations I've had, the first instinct is to think of repairing older buildings, modernizing older development, but preservation, we all know, is much broader than that, right? So, Jonathan, how do you define preservation? What's under that umbrella, and why do you believe it's an important strategy both in Prince George's and around the state?
Yeah, I think this is something, and I love this conversation because it's something that when people think about housing, they don't think about preservation. They think about sort of the sexy side of housing, which is design, construction, production. And so preservation for me and for Prince George's County, it really protects while production adds. And actually, when we think about preservation, at least when I think about preservation, preservation actually accelerates a production strategy. It truly allows production efforts to focus on net new housing growth rather than replacement. And plus, preservation costs much less than new construction, really about 30 to 40% less than new construction. So this is where we can really stretch limited subsidies and allocate more resources towards production. But I think Terry, Don, we have to think of housing as really a leaky bucket. At least I think about it as a leaky bucket. As we produce and pour new units into this particular bucket, there are also covenants expiring on older existing units or newer type units, therefore causing those existing affordable units to really leak out of the bucket altogether. And this is where preservation strategy kind of steps in and stops the leaky bucket and really increases the total supply of affordable housing. So that's why in Prince George's County, and certainly with us, preservation is important.
So, Dom, Jonathan has just cemented our working theory that housing experts all have amazing analogies to use to explain. So we're adding leaky bucket to our list of awesome ways to depict housing challenges in your head. So check on that, Jonathan. And let's roll with what you were saying and let's zoom in a little closer, because I think I agree with everything you just said. Let's get granular in what you're seeing in Prince George's County, particularly where do you see preservation pressure the most? And what I mean by that, do you see, you had mentioned targeting older tax credit developments where you've got expiring affordability, smaller apartment buildings that are going to come on sale in hot markets and potentially be targets for gentrification, subsidized, at the end of their compliance period or other. But what are you seeing on the ground that's hitting your radar more than others?
Yeah, I think for us, we're seeing smaller developments, units that are maybe 50, or properties that are maybe 50 units or less, but also we're seeing some larger properties that are changing hands, moving from seller to buyer, which allow us to kind of step in through our Right of First Refusal program. And especially, when I think about along the Purple Line corridor, Terry, I mean, this is where we've done, I think, an incredible job with preservation, where we've actually preserve thousands of units along the Purple Line corridor. And certainly, I know we'll probably talk about Right of First Refusal, but that has been a hot product for us. It has been one that we've been wildly successful at. I think over the last several years, we've been able to leverage that to actually preserve well over 2,500 units here in Prince George's County. And so for us, when we think about preservation and kind of what's optimal, it's certainly about location and it's certainly about affordability. And we can sort of dive a little bit deeper into that if you want to.
One big question I have, we've used this term a few times now in the conversation, right of first refusal or ROFR. But can you actually explain, like from a high level, what is a ROFR? What is the policy? Is it a red dog? Please tell me it's a dog. It sounds like a dog. But it's seriously, like, what are the practical benefits? If I'm a local government and I hear the great things that Prince George's and other counties are doing with their ROFRs, what do I need to know if I want to bring one to my jurisdiction?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I think it's actually a red dog with spots, really, to kind of look at it. But, right of first refusal is a tool that actually, when there is a seller that's looking to sell 20 or more units in Prince George's County, multifamily dwelling with 20 or more units, it actually has to notify the Department of Housing and Community Development that it's going to sell. That actually triggers us to then actually step in and do a particular evaluation or assessment of that particular property and determine whether or not we want to assign our rights to developers that are on our bench to actually step in and take that property on our behalf. And so the purpose of it is that it preserves affordability. And even if we don't have a developer that we assign it to, we actually go into a particular agreement, an exception, an agreement that actually maintains a covenant on that property. Typically there is some funding that comes with that. There may be a payment in lieu of taxes that we may provide. But the idea of the right of first refusal is that it gives the government the right to kind of step in, assess a particular property, determine that it wants to ensure that affordability remains on that, a covenant of affordability remains on that property, and ensures that it does that for the next 20 or 30 years. So high level, that is sort of right of first refusal.
I want to dig in a little more on that, Jonathan, but I had and you can fact check me on this if necessary, but I wanted to go back and ask, when I first came into this position, of course, everybody had heard what you were doing in Prince George's County with utilizing this tool. And like many of us, we called and said, and we'll talk more about replication later. But in general, what I was fascinated by was that apparently this was passed years ago and was in your code. So the tool was active, but nobody was using it until you did. And I think it's such a fascinating point because we think about battles legislatively and adding all of this high-powered housing apparatus, but sometimes we just have to look at our code and see what's there that we can put to use. So am I right on that?
You're absolutely right. I think it was a tool that was actually enacted in 2013, a number of years ago, sitting on our books. And, with so much going on, and I think through a variety maybe of DHCD we use, we didn't bother to use it. But then we got some dollars from the state. We were able to leverage some other dollars for this. And we began to realize, again, as I said earlier, that, preservation is what accelerates your production strategy, your housing strategy. And the bulb kind of lit up for us, and we began to leverage it heavily and haven't stopped since. And now circling around looking for more money to be able to add to our preservation fund.
So what we've had a lot of luck doing, and I think what our listeners appreciate, is you take the policy and then let's take it down right into those weeds and see how it actually works in practice, because things sound great, but you have to be able to execute on them. So let's walk through a real but hypothetical scenario. Let's use one of your examples. So 50, 75 smaller multifamily apartment building is coming or comes on the market. And rents may be somewhat affordable. It could be a NOAA property, a naturally occurring affordable property. But there's obviously no long-term protection and no guarantee what that purchaser is going to do. So could you walk us through a real scenario of how do you use ROFR to actually get in the middle of that transaction and be as granular as you want, but how does it actually get implemented?
Yeah. Hey, look, I think a great example is a 44-unit property in Riverdale, Maryland. This is where an emerging developer was looking to buy a particular property. The property was on the market. That particular developer reached out to us and indicated, first, the seller actually reached out to us and notified that the property was coming on the market, which then, of course, it really prompts us to take some action, to do some type of evaluation, some type of assessment. And this is where we began. We then kind of run a property up against a certain number of criteria. One, whether or not the property is located within two major corridors for us, Purple Line Corridor, the Blue Line Corridor. Those are pretty hot development corridors for Prince George's County at the moment. Also, whether or not the property is within 1 mile or half a mile of TOD type of development. That is what we look at. We look at whether or not the property is located in sort of a priority funding area for us. So this is an area that's tied to our general plan 2035, which target downtown areas as well as inside the Capital Beltway. We also look at whether or not that property is located in a qualified census tract, in terms of whether or not it's in an area where there's high poverty. And then certainly whether or not it's located in a difficult development area. And so we look at location, we look at affordability. The main piece surrounding affordability is that whether or not, the property are those type of properties where 60% of the units have rents affordable to households at 80% of the lower AMI. So those are some of the boxes that we check. If you score and hit a certain amount of points on that, that triggers ROFR for us. We then we have a number of days to actually go to our bench of developers. We're hopefully an assignment process. If none of our developers then want to kind of bid on this, we then enter into an agreement where also typically that buyer is looking for some type of subsidy to kind of help with rehabilitation. To help with acquisition, and we tie to our subsidy long-term covenant to make sure those particular units remain affordable. So that's kind of how the process works a little bit for us.
Great. That was really well done. And I wanna do what Dom and I called making a point. And what we do is when you say something like that, we go back and say it again because we want people to really hear. You don't just throw this tool out there and hope it sticks against a wall, right? You have criteria. I noted you said it aligns with your master plan. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of county officials. There's a master plan, tie your tools and your resources to that, and you have rules and criteria so it's not random. People know what they're getting into. I know that's what you just said, but I want our audience to understand, like, there's got to be some rules and there's got to be a strategy. But I also heard you say something about money. And that gets us into another issue of this, which is counties don't all have deep pockets or they don't all have access to the lucky money we get from time to time. So could you talk a little bit, and you can brag if you've got the funding.
Can't brag, Terry. I can't brag.
But how do you actually structure the financial part of these deals so that you're competitive in this intervention? And do you have any advice for counties who are counting their pennies trying to figure out how to prioritize funding if they wanted to do something like this?
Yeah, I wish I could brag. I know that there are other jurisdictions that border the nation's capital that can brag a lot louder than me. And so this is where hopefully through our next legislative process, there's some additional funding for Right of First Refusal for ROFR. But for us, we actually have a ROFR preservation fund that, because of the incredible success, I think we're down probably to our last several $1 million in that particular fund. So we're actually going to be reaching out to the state as well as to our county, budget folks to hopefully replenish that particular fund. And that's one of the primary tools. It's a fund dedicated to preservation. But what has also been helpful for us is a financing tool called Payment in lieu of Taxes, PALET. And we use that heavily in combination with our preservation fund in order to help with, providing the necessary gap funding that especially an emerging developer or even a larger developer may need in order to ensure that that acquisition or that rehabilitation takes place in an effort to preserve affordability. And PALET has really kind of been our tool of choice and actually been the tool of demand from a number of our developers of surrounding ROFR as well as surrounding production as well. So it's been a great tool, with payment in lieu of taxes. The county can take a hit in terms of deferring taxes and really in swapping out that for a particular payment per unit. But the thing is, especially on production, most counties aren't getting any taxes on that land or whatever. And so, it's a good trade-off. But PALET, and as well as a combination of PALET and Preservation Fund, has been a great financing duo for us on the preservation side.
Great. Yeah, we won't get too far afield on this one now, but I also, Dom, I think, and as we go, let's continue to talk about this idea of pilot or tax relief at the local level, because Baltimore County is finding it, to be a lifeline to housing. And I know there's been a lot of attention in the General Assembly and will continue to be to how to continue to refine the use of a pilot agreement at the local level, make it easier and smoother for us.
Yeah,
so
one thing I want to point out, Terry, to your point on going back and underlining, Jonathan, you brought up the fact that, you really target areas in TOD, in areas, next to public transit with density. There's a lot of conversation about building in those areas, but I think it's really important that we have a jurisdiction, targeting affordability in those areas and preserving what they have. The conversation right now leans on build, but the other half of that equation, plugging the holes in the bucket, you also have to preserve. So I just think that that's a really interesting facet that folks should walk away with. And so kind of that leads me into my next question. So let's say that I'm a county official. I'm sold. I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, you know what? Jonathan sounds brilliant. Dom's really funny. Terry's on the podcast. But I'm sold on this ROFR idea. What are big lessons from operating this and establishing this that you think that a county official in another jurisdiction should take away? What are the highlights that should be on their mind?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about replicating that, I mean, for us, we actually had to bring on a consultant to help stand this up for us. I mean, someone with some incredible subject matter expertise to really guide us through it, to really lay out sort of a digital platform where we can track those particular transactions, create a system of record, help develop standard operating procedures, help develop sort of a criteria that I laid out where it's just not hodgepodge. It actually follows an objective process, and actually working with industry stakeholders to make sure that we get it right, to make sure that it works. I mean, one of the things, I think probably the next thing for us when it comes to ROFR is that we're looking at developing an emerging developer program that will truly leverage ROFR. And in that particular program, we're talking about, small, local, county-based developers where we're going to target, transactions of 50 units or less for them to step in and actually engage the ROFR process exclusively. So that's another piece that we're looking at, kind of an offshoot of ROFR, creating sort of this EDP, this emerging program specifically for 50 units and below to grow that pipeline of local small developers. There's a lot of things that we can do with this, and that is just a first recommendation. Bring on someone that's smarter than you, that's done this in other jurisdictions, that can help you stand this up quickly and move fast with it.
No, I like that as a point. Bring someone on that's smarter than you. That's exactly why I asked Terry to co-host on this particular subject.
All right, that's your makeup comment.
So I do have a follow-up question, though. How much did Prince George's initially invest in this program? Like, what's the scale of financing? And is that scalable depending on the size of the jurisdiction? Because I think a lot of folks that are listening to this, it's going to be the dollars and cents that really determine. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we initially propped up about $20 million in this program. It was a combination of funding that we got from the state as well as some funding from the county. And that was our start. And we haven't been, and we're about to run out of money. And that's a good thing because we've been incredibly successful with this program. I think we're probably down to our last $2 or $3 million. And this is why we're going to go, with our heads in our hands, kind of begging for money here, because we can show the success. The data shows how successful this particular program is. It shows the impact that it's making on preserving affordability and on preserving the overall affordable housing supply here in Prince George's County. But you don't have to start off with that large amount. It all depends on just how much you're looking to actually allocate per deal. I mean, for us, it was anywhere between $1.5 to $2 million. And so, but hey, look, you can go under that or above that. And especially if you go on to kind of combine that with the palette to kind of really help make that project, that rehab project kind of pencil out. So it varies depending on the jurisdiction, but I know we started out somewhere around 20, 25 million.
So I want to jump in on this too real quick, because as folks trying to solve complex issues at the local level, we often fall for the trap of the shiny program. And we want what it does, and you guys have done it really well because you were so thoughtful. But then you realize, we need a lot more staff capacity to run this, or else we're late to these deals and we look bad, and then nobody wants to give us more money, and things like, or it needs to be tweaked for our market. I am curious if you could talk a little bit about, behind the magic curtain of success lies probably a bunch of really smart people that work for you that are making this thing happen. So talk about what it really takes to get this done behind the curtain. And two, have you had to make any significant tweaks to this to modernize it or to make it even more successful since you kicked it off?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think, when we look behind the curtain, it does take, it takes bodies and it takes labor. And I think for us, we've been fortunate. We got, 2 or 3 folks that's supporting our ROFR program. But, Terry, we had our consultant sort of tethered to it for a long time. It was just really last year where we were able to transition our consulting team out and actually kind of assign the program full time to internal staff. And so really about 2 bodies two and a half bodies that actually support the program. And I think what's important is that you have a true system of record that tracks these particular transactions, where you're able to tie these deals to your funding source, where you're able to kind of see real time what's going on in your ROFR world, so to speak. And that's kind of been a little bit of a challenge for us because we started out with spreadsheets and sort of, home create databases. But now we're ready to kind of transition into something, a true digital platform, a true system of record to be able to track the transactions. I mean, with close to 2,700 units that we've been able to achieve under ROFR, I mean, you've got the number of properties and projects, you got to have a true system of record to be able to manage that.
If I can just jump in really quick, just for a shout out to the audience. You just said ROFR World, and that sounds like the best theme park ever. Like I want to go to ROFR World with the spotted red dogs.
With the spotted red dog. Love it.
It's going to be right after, what's the big thing coming to National Landing, the Sphere?
Sphere, yeah, 6,000 seats, immersive entertainment, yeah, and we're gonna have a three-ring circus, ROFR World,
You heard it here first. Breaking news on the briefing room.
Jonathan's looking to trademark that, but I want to kind of hammer the point that we've got decision makers. So there's two sorts of folks out there. There's folks like me that are looking for anything I can so I can jump in and do this, and then there's the folks that make the policies that may help folks like Jonathan do what he's already doing more of and better. So if you had advice out there to anybody who's listening, we've talked a little bit about replication, but are there things that the policymakers can do to make this easier and better for you, but also easier and better to replicate around the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think fortunate for the county, we have policymakers that understand the importance. I mean, we're in the midst of affordable housing. We're in the midst of a little bit of affordable housing crisis. I think Prince George's County may be doing just a little bit better in terms of housing productions and the number of units produced annually. But we understand that there is still a crisis. And I think from a policy perspective, we have good folks on our campus, strong leadership, bold leadership that's supportive of affordable housing. That's actually that I think my agency, we have the ear of our leaders in council or of our leaders on the executive side in pursuing more money, more funding for what we need. And the key thing, I think, is showing the impact, being able to anchor what we do in real world community impact, showing exactly how what we're doing is preventing the displacement of seniors and vulnerable citizens, how showing that, what we're doing surrounding affordable housing help promote healthy outcomes, due to the need of providing basic shelter from the environment. And that the work that we do in affordable housing, it goes just beyond something coming out of the ground, goes just beyond units, but it really stabilizes, education for children by negating the constant need for families moving around to try and make ends meet due to housing costs. And that lastly, what we do in producing and preserving affordable housing, it creates more disposable income for residents for the purchase of essential goods and services. So it's, there's a human side to all of this that I think sometimes doesn't get talked about. We talk about the bricks and sticks, but that's the piece that's important for us. And that's the piece that's important for policymakers, for our executives. And that's why we do this work day in and day out.
By the way, bricks and sticks, that is another phrase that we love here on the briefing room. I feel like every episode we're getting a bricks and sticks drop. So Jonathan, thank you for keeping the trend going. I have to say, this has been a really enlightening conversation. Too often, preservation flies under the radar. All of the conversations in Annapolis are about building new units. And again, we're talking about that bucket. We have to plug those holes and preserve the great things that we have. And so I think like this part of the conversation needs more spotlight. I am thrilled that we can have you on and, could really dig into that a little bit more. You're doing great work out there in Prince George's County.
Yeah, agreed. And ROFR, we're gonna drop ROFR one or two more times, but it's a great tool. But I don't want to have lost in this that even if you can't build this really sophisticated apparatus, and really kudos to you, Jonathan, and the team for continuing to lead on this work. But preservation alone, like really focusing in on having a preservation policy in place and putting some funding towards it so we can protect homes that might otherwise disappear from that affordable inventory and keep staying above water. As the economy gets better, we build more. We don't want to lose ground. So thanks for underscoring that important point. It isn't said enough.
All right, so this seems like a great place to leave it. Jonathan, thank you again for coming on. I cannot wait to have you on again and we can talk about ROFR, the big red spotted dog, and all the other cool things happening in Prince George's.
Fantastic. Look forward to it. Anytime, Dom and Terry. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, let me read us out. Remember, the briefing room will be on Tuesdays with the regular Conduit Street podcast on Fridays. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you to everyone for listening to the briefing room here on the Conduit Street podcast.